guys, on today's episode, we're going to talk about medical issues and money. We have a lot of experience with that. We're going to talk a lot about the money side. We're going to tell you just a lot about our story in general and some of the faith side, because this is about faith, family, fun, and finance. So how we stayed a family during all the medical problems that we've had, how we handled our finances during that time, how we maintained fun in the midst of all of the fear and all of the unknown, all of the pain. Oh, we went through a lot of stuff. So we're going to tell you about that, and then we'll talk about the faith aspect of it as well. All right, let's talk about our medical issues. So we've really had two major medical issues. The first one, and not necessarily in chronological order, but I had a table saw accident and cut almost all of my index finger off. It was still attached, but cut my index finger, got my middle finger partly, and my thumb partly as well. So that was a very expensive mistake. I remember when it happened, my first reaction was just shock. I didn't really even know that I injured myself at the time. So I looked down and just saw that my hand was bleeding, and I had no idea how bad it was. So I came to get Becca and, told her what was going on. And at that point, I knew at a minimum I was going to have to get stitches. And so I was like, well, this was an expensive mistake. As an accountant, that was the first thing on my mind. As a personal finance coach, which I wasn't a coach at the time, but I was still someone who is very aware of their finances on a regular basis. And that was something that was readily on my mind.
Yes, I came out and got him a towel and got on the phone, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm calling the ambulance." He said, "Don't do that. We'll just drive. It'll be expensive."
Yeah, at that point, she had seen that it was worse than I thought it was.
I could tell, yes.
And so we got the ambulance there. Turned out I had to have a helicopter ride to Northwest Arkansas because there wasn't a good hand surgeon at the time in Fort Smith on duty. There is some excellent hand surgeons in Fort Smith, but they just weren't on duty at the time. Mm-hmm. So they flew me to Northwest Arkansas to get the surgery done, and it was quite the ordeal. We'll talk more about that maybe a little bit in a minute. Let's talk about the other issues health-wise that we've had with money.
Oh, so when he says we have two major ones, it's his one major one, and I am the second one.
Well, and in reality, when we first got married, I really didn't have a lot of health problems.
No.
At all.
Really healthy.
I had allergies, and I was the one that gets sick all the time.
Mm-hmm. I was never sick.
And Becca was never really sick that much. But ultimately, I think you've probably become the one that has more health problems than me overall.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've probably had more health problems than me. You've had, how many surgeries, roughly?
At least 15.
At least 15, yeah. Due to a polymetal cyst on your tailbone.
Yep.
And then you've also had some severe mental health struggles.
Yeah.
Those have landed you basically in the hospital a couple of times.
Yeah.
And finding the right treatment was difficult.
Yeah, so with multiple surgeries on the same thing, years of mental health up and downs, and narcolepsy. Mm-hmm. And with all three kind of overlapping and cycling around each other over multiple years.
Yeah, the narcolepsy thing was a really weird thing to figure out initially too, because you came home one day and you were like, "Hey, do you ever fall asleep while you're driving?"
I don't even remember that.
No, that's not normal. That's not good. And that's when we knew you needed a sleep study. We got the narcolepsy thing figured out, and that's been a long ordeal. Fortunately, there's treatment for that, so we were able to get medicine to...
And thankfully, we were able to figure that out sooner than most people who haven't.
True, yeah. And so that part we got under control relatively quickly. The mental health thing was a long, drawn-out process, and we're still exploring what the best options are for you.
Yeah.
So the first thing we want to talk about in terms of what does this matter to you as a listener is sometimes medical issues get worse before they get better.
Yeah.
And we've definitely experienced that. Getting the proper diagnosis, in Becca's case, she was originally diagnosed as bipolar. And we're pretty sure at this point that was a misdiagnosis.
And for those of you listening who are familiar with it, I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. So the less obvious option of the two.
Right. And so at the time, a lot of indicators seemed to point towards that. So it wasn't, I mean, the doctor wasn't a bad doctor or anything like that. It was just that was the best conclusion we could come to based on what we knew at the time.
Yeah, it's called practice for a reason.
Sure.
And they are sometimes figuring it out with you.
And so we've learned probably in the past year, roughly, and maybe less than that, that a lot of her symptoms are a result of ADHD. And a lot of people may not be familiar with that, but
And being on medicine for bipolar when I didn't have that
correct. So
condition.
yeah, let's back up.
Didn't know ADHD happened until I got off those meds.
So now we've realized that the ADHD causes a lot of effects that look like bipolar, but it's really the overwhelm triggering a rapid mood change or panic attack.
Being overstimulated.
Not a bipolar issue. It's more being overstimulated.
Fight or flight, essentially.
Yes. Once we pin that down, that really helped transition towards treating the correct symptoms.
And furthermore, once we started suspecting that bipolar was incorrect, coming off those medications over time clearly pointed more towards an ADHD diagnosis than a bipolar.
And so that was where, as we were struggling with all of this, we had to pray for wisdom and pray that God would help us make the right decisions, lead us to doctors that could treat well. Obviously, we prayed for healing several times, and God told us just keep doing what we were doing during that time and trust Him. And so that's what we did. We kept seeking medical advice. We kept trying to be wise and praying about it throughout the whole process. So the main point that we're making here is that finding the right medicine for you, that can take time, and it can take a lot of time.
Especially with what they call invisible, whether mental health or things like fibromyalgia and other situations where they don't really know yet in science what the cause is and how to fix it.
Right.
And how to see it.
Yeah, and so usually when they put you on a new medication, it takes anywhere from 2 up to 8 weeks to test it and know if that's working for you. Yeah. And so it took that long to get on it, but it also takes time to wean off of the medication. And so it's a long process to find the right medicine. Once we realized that, the mental health medicines that they had put you on for bipolar especially were not working well.
I think it was about 6 months after starting that process where we really started noticing all the side effects from those medicines because I was no longer dealing with them.
And during this process, you ultimately ended up having to quit your job.
Yeah.
Because, your mental health was just not in a state to be able to do the job for lots of reasons. Number one, you were having trouble remembering things. And so you would call for help to a supervisor or whatever, and they would tell you what to do. And as soon as you hung up the phone, you couldn't remember anything. So that was a big problem in and of itself, but then also caused the stress on top of that and the panic of what do I do now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so ultimately that resulted in her having to quit her job, which was a huge loss of income. So that's a financial point, we had to learn at that point, to change our lifestyle financially. We couldn't keep living the exact same way we were because we weren't making the exact same money. We were making half the money, basically.
And it got so bad to the point that you also had to leave your job.
Correct.
To help, being on mental health medication has a lot of side effects.
Sure.
Especially if it is the wrong kind. And early in the process, we didn't know that. And so I had a lot of trouble with suicidal ideations and things like that, which...
Yeah, and so there came a point where, we had to sit down and have the discussion of what do we do now?
Yeah.
And so at that point, I took time away from the job and it ultimately ended up not having the job anymore.
Yeah. Thankfully, we had been able to save up.
Yes, by this point in our marriage, we had what I would consider a fully funded emergency fund, which is 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. We probably had more than that saved by that point. I think ultimately throughout this process, I probably didn't work for about a year.
I think
in terms of full time. It was probably 1.5 to 2 years before I even went to working a lot.
And
And
it-
even now, I don't work full time. Fortunately, I've been blessed with very well paying positions
Yes.
that allow me flexibility. and
Hindsight
so forth.
is 2020, and God
God's
has
definitely
seen us
taken-
through the whole time.
Yes, God has taken care of us and blessed us financially and in every way.
Because you had left your job in 2019. And so early 2020, when COVID was a big thing, you couldn't get a job then. And that prolonged what
Not
we
easily,
weren't
anyway,
ready
yeah.
for.
Yeah. He really never had to worry about money during that whole process.
No, we probably did worry sometimes.
Sure, but God blessed us
Yes.
and blessed us with knowledge in advance to have saved that money,
Yeah.
blessed us by our investments, which were growing exponentially in the stock market
Yeah.
during that period of time. And so we were able to harvest some of those gains and use
Yeah.
that money to live off of.
When we needed it.
When we needed it, yes. And so we were very blessed.
Yeah.
And that worked out really well. And so that's a great case for why you need an emergency fund, because you just never know what life's going to throw at you.
Yeah, and I think that like the Bible talks a lot about wisdom, and God blessed us because we were faithful with the little.
I
And
100%
set an
believe that.
emergency fund, and somehow he has taken us over the last 6 or 7 years to a point where we haven't had to worry about
Correct.
money.
You know, I think that, and I don't say this to brag or anything, but I think that we are, in terms of dollar amount, a very giving couple. We try to be very generous and give to the church, to Love Has Feet, to a
Yeah.
lot of things. And I believe that God blesses that.
Yeah.
I believe God blesses us because of our faithfulness. You know, we prioritize attending church and the things of God and all
What
of
do
that.
they say? You can't outgive God.
I believe that when we do our part and we seek God faithfully, the Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. And I believe that we are living proof of that. Not that we always got it right, or that we never sin, or we never messed up, but we try our hardest day after day in everything to seek first the kingdom of God. And I think that He has blessed us because of that.
In the days that we don't, or at least for me, I notice it.
Mhm.
The whole day is different.
And I think it's important to point out when I say He's blessed us because of that, I'm not saying He magically put money in our bank account.
No.
I'm not saying that He magically made all our expenses disappear. Were there times that He did both of those things?
He didn't
Absolutely.
magically heal all our medical problems either.
Correct. And by magically, we mean supernaturally. Obviously, He could.
Overnight, yeah.
He very well could do that. God is capable of doing whatever He wants, but He didn't. Most of the time, God chooses to work through people.
Yeah.
And so, what does that look like? Well, it looks like Him blessing us with a job and us using the money that we get from that job responsibly
Yeah.
to take care of ourselves, first and foremost, and to take care of His kingdom.
Yeah. While
As well.
we both had to be off work,
You know,
he sustained us.
because
But
of those preparations that He allowed us to put into place, and we obeyed and did accordingly.
So while we both had to be off work for my mental health concerns, he sustained us. But as soon as we got to a point again where I didn't have to be babysat, kind of, and on watch, he provided income for you and opportunities for you to take advantage of,
Correct.
even ones you didn't really always enjoy.
Sure. I mean, I don't enjoy most work. I
I
think lots of life and being successful in life is learning to do things you don't enjoy.
yes,
But that being said, you are absolutely correct. God provided us with opportunity after opportunity, and is still providing us with new.
and right on time with everything that was happening.
Yes, and He's still providing us new opportunities today that could only have come about through divine intervention.
Yes.
I mean, they're not things that would have happened just because of my own abilities. I think God ordained them and put them into place for us. And
He is a God of the process.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. So another thing is, once all of this took place, there came a point where we realized that Becca probably, unless God performed an absolute miracle, would never hold down a full-time job again, unless God did a miracle.
No, yeah, at that point, it felt like no hope. It wasn't,
Right.
but there was moments
just due to the culmination of, or the combination of all of her medical problems, there were just
I
lots of
wasn't
reasons
reliable.
why you couldn't work a full-time job.
Yeah, I wasn't reliable enough to care for my own like self-care
General well-being.
needs. And I'm talking basics like brushing my teeth every day, keeping up with eating, making sure I eat. So I wasn't going to be reliable enough on the
we went through
daily.
times where you couldn't wash your own hair.
Yeah,
I mean, there were some
and it didn't
difficult
make any
times.
sense because I'd never been like that.
Right. Sometimes disability is the reality.
Mhm.
And that was the case for us. She was medically disabled at that point, severely.
Yeah,
Not necessarily physically, although the narcolepsy did disable you physically for a period.
it was the combination.
But the combination of the pilonidal cyst and all the surgeries, multiple surgeries, and then
And then as soon as that started seeming to get better, COVID hit. And so it just another hit on the mental health
yeah,
because I was homebound the whole time for those first couple surgeries. And then I was homebound for COVID as soon as I thought I had freedom.
right.
And that would make anyone depressed.
Sure. So let's talk about, sometimes disability is the reality of the situation. And applying for disability benefits is not an easy process.
Mhm.
We've been through that. We were successful. She was approved. Probably
It
took
took-
how long?
2 years or a little over
Right. From
the
it
time that
started.
we first filed to the time we got approved. Then we had to wait another couple months for the check.
How many times during that 2 years did you want to quit and not keep filing for disability?
Infinite amount of times. I don't even know.
Yeah. a
So
lot.
many.
You were so over it. We were both sick of it by the time it was over with. Was it worth it in hindsight?
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's always the hindsight.
Right.
Just got to keep pushing.
So, if that's you and you're in that boat, and we won't spend a ton of time on this, but number one, we do recommend getting a lawyer because they
Yes.
are there to be your friend, to tell you the truth of the matter about whether or not you will or will not actually qualify. They're going to let you know. They're not going to take your case probably if you aren't going to qualify.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is you want a lawyer that you only have to pay if you win. And so if they don't think you're going to win, they're not going to take your case because then they're not going to
Yeah.
get paid. We had a very helpful lawyer. He told us from day one, you're going to get denied probably 3 times. Then we're going to appeal. And
We're
then it's
gonna
going to be
talk
an
to the
interview
judge.
process. And you'll talk to the judge. And then you'll have a shot at getting it, maybe.
Yep.
And so we knew all that going in. So when we got denied, it wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, was it annoying? Yes. But we knew what to expect.
But if we were doing that on our own,
we would have
you
quit.
can, but we would have quit right away. And
Hands
everyone
down.
I've talked to has quit right away too.
Yeah, we would have gave up.
Mhm.
The lawyer was very helpful, and that ultimately, whatever we paid him, I don't even care what it was because it was worth it.
And he did all the work.
And it's usually a set amount, and they cap it at a certain amount. So
Usually
you can only
comes
earn so
out of
much.
back pay,
and it just comes out of your back pay. Yeah,
which is something to add here. All that time that we waited,
yeah, those 2 years.
once you get approved, they paid whatever they approved you at back for
Backwards.
every month since the first date you filed.
Yeah, and so the lawyer got paid out of that check, and then we got a large check because of the back pay.
Which further helped while you were out of work, actually,
Absolutely.
looking back.
Yeah. Which fortunately I was also able to get unemployment for some period of that time as
Yeah.
well. And I did work a couple small odd jobs here and there. I did some work for the Census Bureau and
Yeah.
minor stuff, just for more for fun than for the work. I think I lost money doing the Census Bureau because I had some minor car damage in the process of
Oh.
doing that. And by the time I paid to repair that, I think just about all of my money I made went towards that.
Yep.
Anyway, that's aside from the point. Let's go now from talking about all the stuff that you've gone through. Let's talk about my finger accident, because the table saw accident, honestly, was probably the most expensive thing. that
It
we've had
definitely
to
looked
do
like
at
the
one
most
time.
expensive thing, yeah.
Yeah, because the helicopter, when they have to helicopter you, there's special insurance you can pay for a helicopter flight. Your normal insurance doesn't always cover that.
Yeah.
But sometimes it does. And so we had to fight with the insurance, and what happened was they processed it. The original bill for the helicopter, you know how much it was?
It was like over 45,000.
Yeah, it was about $45,000
Yeah.
for that helicopter flight. Fortunately, I was awake for it, got to enjoy a little bit of it. So it was $45,000 at least. That was just the helicopter bill. That's not including any of the medical
Yeah.
expenses for the surgeries and all of that I had to do in the process.
And just like filing for disability, the first 2 and 3 times when you file for your insurance is going to get denied.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, or at least you should be prepared for that to
Yeah.
happen. And so, number one thing you should do is if they send you a bill, call your insurance company and say, have you even paid out anything on this, first of all? And if they say no, you can throw that bill in the trash and let your insurance do their thing before you worry about anything else.
Yeah, don't let it scare you. And
Don't just pay the first bill that comes in.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go
No,
ahead and
that's what I
say
was gonna
you were
say.
gonna say.
Don't let those big emergency or medical bills scare you into paying, because you may not owe it all.
You may not know it all. And so the first thing we did was we called the insurance company and asked them, and then we called the helicopter company and asked them, what do we do? Because the insurance company hasn't paid most of it. They paid a little bit. And they said, well, call them and ask them to reprocess it. And we did
Yep.
that. And
Always call both sides. You get
Yes.
more information.
call them multiple times if you have to.
The helicopter company told us, like, what's your insurance? Oh, they'll pay. You just have to keep on
Be
them.
persistent. And persistent calling is your friend.
Talk
It's
to the right
annoying.
people.
It's annoying and it's a lot of work, but
It'll save you about $40,000.
it could save you a lot of money, yes. And so I think we ended up paying maybe $4,000,
Yeah.
which is just 10% of the
Less.
total bill when it was all said and done. Maybe less than that, yeah. But we did have to be proactive and call, and we did have to negotiate some, but that's what happened. We were very successful in paying way less than what it could have cost us.
In worst case scenario, if your insurance really doesn't cover something like that, the provider will work with you and set up a payment plan.
And fortunately, this is another example of where we, at this point in our marriage, had saved quite a bit of money. We had a fully funded emergency fund plus some probably by this point. And so when this happened and we had to pay out $4,000, was it inconvenient? Yes. Was it a catastrophe? No.
Yeah.
We were able to kind of check for that and move on with our lives and live peaceful.
At this point, we were even prepared,
To
maybe
pay
not all
more.
at once, but to pay the full $45,000 bill over the short term. But
we
we
could have done
knew we didn't owe it, so we did the process.
Right. Well, we hope hearing this episode has helped you see the value of having a fully funded emergency fund and see, that life happens and medical problems happen and they can happen at any time. And so the more you're able to prepare yourself for that and save money in advance, the better off you'll be, the less stress you'll have when those things arise. And it's just a much better way to live your life.
Yeah.
Our emergency fund saved us so much stress, and it helped us survive a very difficult time in our life and what could have been a difficult time in our marriage.
And it honestly was at times.
Sure.
I remember being caretaker after your accident, and you were caretaker for a lot of the stuff I went through, and sometimes that's the harder job.
Right. Yeah. But fortunately, we were not having to have the money fights or
On top of everything else.
Yes. So thank you for listening. We hope that this episode has been beneficial for you, and we hope that you will share it with friends and family. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast so that you get to hear all the latest episodes.
You can message us on Facebook or Instagram at Bolton Financial Coaching with any questions or topic ideas that you'd like to hear, anything regarding faith, family, fun, or finance, and we'll do our best to answer.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing from you, and we love you guys. Goodbye for now.